Hi, and welcome back to the MilVet Podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Aronson, and today I'm joined by Tyler Sweatt. Tyler was the Chief Revenue Officer and is now the Chief Executive Officer of Second Front Systems. He's also a partner at the Silicon Valley Defense Group. On a personal note, I gotta say, Tyler is one of the most entertaining dudes in defense, in my opinion. Sadly, he is a West Point grad, but I promise he's a great guy despite that fact. Gotta get the digs in while I can. People come on the show and then they talk trash to me, and I'm like, yo, it's my show, man. What the hell?
Yeah, this is my
house. But before we dive in, would like to invite you to like, subscribe, share the podcast with a friend. Tyler, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm such a huge fan of everything you guys are doing.
Thanks, man. Tyler, I've given a 30,000-foot overview of your background, but it's always really helpful to hear it in the first person. So can you take a few minutes to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And Brendan, again, thanks for having me and the opportunity here. So Tyler Sweatt, Chief Executive Officer at Second Front. Background, started in the Army. You know, I joke now, I'm a year group 05 guy. So I joke, hey, I was in the Army when we thought we were going to win in Afghanistan. So it's been a little while. And if you don't laugh at it, it just makes you sad. So
God,
transitioned out of the Army. I think like most folks, I didn't entirely know what I wanted to do. Sort of sat down with my wife and, had a big legal pad of potential career paths. I'm like, hey, I could do, I could go into finance, or I could go into government, or I could go into tech, or I could go into, and we were drawing literally like, where would this require us to be geographically? If we wanted to be at, an epicenter or like a top 3 or 4. And one of the commonalities was like, hey, at some point, like I knew I would come back into government or around government. And my wife was a military brat. We moved around a bunch, and she was like, cool, like we're buying a house in Virginia and like you can figure it out, but like we're raising the kids without moving. And so that led me into Northern Virginia, and got fortunate with some cool consulting opportunities that let me learn a mix of sales and delivery and like interviewing and facilitation and kind of all of these softer skills on storytelling and storyboarding. Use that to keep chasing things that were interesting to me, which, increasingly just became emerging technologies in regulated industries. And how do we look at, capability development, capability deployment, whether that's in corporate development, whether that's in R&D, whether that is for a pharmaceutical or a finance company or the national security community. And then that, you just keep drawing that line, and it keeps pulling you to like earlier stage things. And like next thing you know, I was like employee number 3 at like an adversarial machine learning company in like 2018. So it was way before anybody was thinking about it. We were hacking facial recognition models, and I was on the Hill trying to explain this to people. And then that led me to Second Front, where I came over as sort of sales hire, go-to-market hire 1 on the game warden thesis. So Second Front had been around for a while, was looking at, hey, we need, the product they had wasn't scaling the way they wanted it to. So myself and a guy named Enrique Odi, Air Force Academy guy, which the jokes write themselves there.
He's not here to defend himself.
Yeah, that's exactly. I saw Paul pull up a little bit. But came over as like, like at the time, maybe like employees 10 and 11. And sort of went to work on proving a thesis and, getting your sort of first couple stakeholders, getting the personas tiled in and getting product market fit. And the founder asked me to take over, I don't know, like a year and a half ago, something like that, 15, 16 months ago. And now I'm just acting like I know what I'm doing. So it's
perfect. Just like the rest of us. I mean, there's a bunch to dive in on there. We're going to talk about sales. Listeners of the podcast are going to be like, dude, will you just give it a rest? You're just like beating the sales drum constantly. And it's like, no, I won't. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to dive into the complexities of raising capital in the national security space. We're going to talk a little bit about, the defense sector as an industry of choice for veterans. But before we dive into some of these more like philosophical things, I want to ask just a really straightforward question that is going to have a small wrinkle in it that's going to make it more tricky. What does Second Front Systems do? Okay, so that's the easy part. And then the hard part is, can you explain it to me as if I'm 5 years old, I don't know any DoD acronyms? I would love to hear a little bit about the company.
Yeah. Second Front Systems first and foremost is a public benefit corporation. And what that means in a super simple way is a traditional private company. The primary responsibility is to make money, right? To return value to shareholders. At a PBC, that exists, but it is on par with advance the mission and execution of the mission. Our mission is to accelerate the transition of technology to the national security community. So for us, mission is as important as money, just sort of stitched into the DNA. How we do that is we make it easier for commercial software to get approved, meet the requirements, pass the tests, get deployed to effectively make it easier for cutting edge commercial software to work in classified and regulated environments. If you think about sort of like the 5-year-old version of that, when you buy a car, it's already sort of done to standard, and maybe you have to go once a year, once every 2 years, and kind of get it re-looked at. That's because there's all of these processes that exist to do all the certifications all the way through. That's abstracted away. You don't see that as that 5-year-old buying a car. You're like, cool, I can go drive this off the lot. If all of those processes didn't exist and you were kind of building the car yourself and doing it yourself, you would spend millions of dollars. You would spend years just proving the baseline. So we do that for software. We make it so that you can go fast, how much it's going to cost, and the users can get access to it.
Awesome. There's a couple things to double click on there, but I just want to try and maybe back brief a little bit to confirm that it's so simple even a Marine can understand.
Second Front founded by Marines, man. So it's in there. There's 2 boxes of Crayolas though. So
I was just going to say your business plan must be written in blue crayon.
Primary colors only.
Excellent. So to build a piece of software for the DoD is extremely complex. There are security requirements. There are requirements on the business itself. There's just a lot of different things that you have to do. And if I wanted to do that, I wanted to start a software business and build on the DoD systems, I'm guessing I'm spending an absolute ton of money, which is like in direct contrast to the lean startup methodology of getting a minimum viable product and then gauging a customer's reaction. And so my understanding is that you guys have a platform, and then I can build on your platform and you streamline these approval processes so that I can get that user feedback quickly and in a more straightforward way. Is that an accurate read?
Yep. It's a great read.
Cool. Okay.
Anything's possible.
Perfect. I actually didn't realize that you guys were a public benefit corp. That's the same thing as a C corp, correct? Or excuse me, a B corp.
Yeah. Similar. Yeah.
Cool. That's cool. I mean, I imagine that adds some additional wrinkles onto the business in terms of like thinking about fundraising.
Yeah. So it hasn't added wrinkles in there in the fact that like we just lead with it and we use it as sort of like, we use the mission as an assessment sort of metric or phase for the partners we're going to bring in, right? So we won't go bring in capital that we think is, at odds, philosophically or materially, like with the mission.
Yeah, makes sense. It's almost like a good, like a sales qualification hurdle, right? It's like, do these people, are they aligned with us on this mission? And if not, then that's a great indication that we should not be raising capital.
That's exactly right. It is a qualification hurdle. It's a better way to put it.
That's interesting. I want to ask a little bit. So understand what the company does. Can you tell me a little bit about like, who are your customers? Who are the folks that are coming to you guys for help in navigating the DoD system?
Yeah, I think when we were sort of going out initially, so the product's been in the market, a little less than 3 years. When we launched, I think our initial thesis was like, hey, this will be great. We're gonna, to your point on sort of like the lean startup methodology, we're gonna help these earlier stage companies, maybe these like, non-traditionals really sort of figured out. Our second customer was like a international billion-dollar defense prime. And we were like, oh, that's interesting. So I start there because that sort of broadened the aperture for us, like at jump. And now, customers range from publicly traded sort of, enterprise software companies to defense primes to high flying startups and sort of everything in between, which I think is a really cool thing for us. Like our approach has been, when you think about what we're optimizing for, we're optimizing for some predictability and stability in the market, in that place in between, like, I am building something and I want to sell and deliver it, to then how do I get it being used by a user. There's like a lot of just non-primary, like dollar and time, that's just wasted is a really strong word, but like is dedicated to this like weird gap in between. If we can rip that out, we then have sort of set a foundation for a more vibrant and stable market around defense tech. And then you can sort of continue to kind of extrapolate that. And you're like, cool, if we do that, then market forces can start to take shape. More traditional sort of technology market forces, on your point around customer feedback and iteration and velocity. It's just like, it's a net win for the country, for the community. It gives private capital like a little bit more, I think, of a predictable path that those companies that are trying to maybe come in are going to follow. So maybe there's less less risk or variability on that journey. And again, the net out of that is like, if we can get it right, the impact on national security is just generational.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's like a pillar or cornerstone of all of the innovation that we're seeing happen in defense, which is awesome. Super cool. It's a cool spot to be in.
Dude, I get up every morning, I fire out of bed. It rocks.
Somebody tells you that that's 100% accurate. I feel like you fire out of bed and then directly into a kettlebell swing, but I don't know. Maybe that's just
we go move some heavy things in the morning. Yeah.
Good. Can you give me a sense of just like the size of the business? We have people on this business who are like pre-product market fit all the way through like Fortune 100 companies. Like how big is the team? I know you guys recently closed a fundraise. Would love to hear just a little bit about, like, for people that are listening that are less familiar, like how big is the business?
We're about 130, 135 headcount right now. So, it's like an infantry company kind of size there. From a sort of like growth of the business type thing, I think it's the last week of the quarter and a bunch of deals are floating. So we're somewhere in like between 75 and 80 unique customers. We've got teams on the ground working with international governments. We've got, a small European office. So, not a Fortune 1, not anywhere in there, but just completed our Series C. Yeah. Where we raised an additional $70 million, led by Salesforce Ventures, which was super cool. So we're in that like neat spot where I think we've gotten out of like the first kind of like, can I get product market fit and what is, exit velocity and things like that. And now we're getting into like, the scale in between on like, how do I take kind of that like MVP or, the first kind of like RTM and turn that into GA enterprise grade. That's where we are right now. It's awesome, man. Fortunate to get to work with like some unbelievable organizations and partners. And like I said, kind of have an outsized impact, right? It's pretty cool.
It's super cool. I mean, you get to interact with amazing businesses that are doing awesome work for our country. Yeah. I'm grateful you guys are doing the work. It's so important.
I appreciate it, man.
And for those that are listening to the podcast and are not like watching the video version of this on YouTube, what you didn't see or what you didn't see in listening to it is that after he said, we raised $70 million from Salesforce, Tyler did brush the dirt off his shoulder. It was like, no big deal. I mean, whatever. Like, it's cool. That's awesome.
Dude, it's a testament to the team and like just the quality of the team, the caliber of sort of the customers and the impact in the market. Like it was I can say with 100% certainty that I had very little to do with the fundraise. It just was a manifestation because of the impact the team is making, which was super cool.
Yeah, it's amazing to see. I want to actually ask you a couple of questions. You guys are rapidly scaling. When you joined, it was 10, 11, 12 people, something like that. And today it's 130. What have been some of the challenges in growing really rapidly from a very small team into a bigger team? And what are some of the challenges and opportunities that you see in this next phase of growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll caveat, because I think one of the most interesting learnings for me that I think maybe in hindsight shouldn't have surprised me, but surprised me at sort of the initial intersection was, we talk about that 10 to 130 and sort of beyond. Like, I was in different roles throughout that. So there were discussions or decisions or considerations that like maybe I didn't weigh in on when I was CRO, because I was like, oh, like they'll figure this out, whatever. Like, I don't have time to worry about that. And then, a year and a half later, it was like, oh, joke's on you. Like, now you have to worry about that. I was like, oh, why did we do it this way and not that way? So there's an aspect of like the little stuff matters. And if you're not careful, especially through scale, you can end up in a couple kind of like weird spots, right? You can end up in, I think thing one to be aware of is at like some point you will have organizational debt. Everybody always talks about technical debt. These decisions you made on a product that you're sort of stuck with or you've invested in, you're going to have the same thing organizationally. You're going to have to think about like, how do you synchronize, remediation of that debt? I think there will be a voice in your head that's like, oh, just rip the Band-Aid off and fix it. But like, that might not be practical given, current operational requirements. So you're doing like a little bit of art and science, which is super challenging. I think that's one. I think two is, right, and it's the old sales adage, right? Like, do you want it cheap? Do you want it fast? Do you want it good? Like, pick two. It's the same thing. It's the same thing with hiring.
Yeah.
So like you can say, hey, I need to grow by 30 and I need, 10 sellers, 10 software engineers, and 10 DevOps guys. Like, cool. I hear that. Now think about how are you assessing for, technical sort of caliber and experience and capability, and how are you assessing for culture? I think there is sometimes it's overwhelming from a time investment standpoint to do it right. It is the easiest thing to get wrong is to mishire for culture. And you might not recognize that for like 6 to 8 months. That is the sunken place from like a hiring standpoint. And then the third one is, you probably need like 30% to 50% less people than you think you do. But that is a painful reality to live in. And I don't know. I just start taking all of our plans and, we go through hey, what's the next 24 months look like? And everybody makes a plan. And I'm like, all right, cool. Cut those in half. How do I do it with this many people instead of that? Because you don't want to end up overhiring and you don't want to end up then having to let people go and having to do like negative life experience. And like, it's just scaling fast with the right culture and quality is going to be really, really, really hard.
Yeah. And I mean, I can hear before we hit record on the podcast, we had a quick conversation about a few of these topics. And, one thing that you said to me that I thought was really impactful was like the old adage of going slow to go fast. Yep. And you can hear it in everything that you're talking about in terms of scaling. It's just like, hey, we need to be like deliberate and thoughtful about how we do these different things. Can't be ripping Band-Aids off immediately. Can't be hiring way too quickly without making sure that they're a good cultural fit. I mean, it's commendable. And I think it's something that myself and every business owner can learn something from that. I mean, it is like so important.
It's there's a I'm gonna get his name wrong. The Rakuten CEO has like the 310 or 3 to 100 whatever rule. I think Sequoia has like a good write up on it on their website, and it's effectively like every time something triples in size, everything breaks.
Yeah.
And like, that would be my rallying cry. Like, if you take one thing away from this, instill that as like a first principle in everybody you're hiring so they understand it. Because you'll have folks who will join and they'll be like reticent to change. And it's like antithetical to a high growth startup, right? If you go read any of the books, like everything is sort of changing. So that's where I think you can run into that hiring problem of, hey, you get somebody who's great, but then they're like, oh, why is the org changing? Like, what's going on? And you're like, wait, why are you asking that question? So yeah, go
It's
painfully slow on the important stuff.
their job is going to change as you guys grow. And
Yeah.
the goal is that hopefully they also change, right?
That's
Like
right.
we all become better versions of ourselves because our jobs get trickier, they get harder, they get more complicated.
And the job itself might change, right? Like
Yeah.
even when I took this job, I was like, hey guys, like I've never done this before. I'm confident I can get us like, maybe to the next 2 ridge lines. I think I'm our best bet for that. And I was like, realistically, like if we get to some spot and the investors are like, hey, like we need to prepare for an IPO and like go do the banks. Like I'm a lot of things. Like I don't think I'm earnings call Tyler, maybe. Right? I've never really done that. But I said to him, I was like, yeah, hey, like I'll get it to a point where you guys make a decision if you want to bring in a professional CEO or not. And like, cool, that's showbiz. Like the job is to advance, right? The job isn't, hey, I'm going to hold on to this job or this perception of influence or power or vanity or whatever, right? The job is learn, iterate, grow, learn, iterate, grow, learn, iterate, grow. And that can manifest itself in lateral promotions, in different roles and all of that. But if you're a startup and you're growing fast, what you're trying to do is increase the relative value of your equity and not the title. So if you can gobble up a ton of experience, kind of raise the boats from a raising tide standpoint, and then you're there. If you try to hold on to a role, it almost doesn't matter how good you are. Like there's a small, it's not even a quintile, like a decile of people that can probably do that, and everybody else, it's going to end up being like oil and water.
Yeah. Well, you got a team first mentality and a humble attitude, and that just like goes.
You got to have it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, which is another just like kind of plug for like why we love helping companies hire veterans, because we just you just come built in with that value.
I mean, I always laugh. Right? Give me veterans. Give me I say D1 athletes, but that sounds like I'm excluding D2 and D3. Just give me like high caliber athletes, because there's an aspect of, hey, it is about the team and it's about the outcome. And if like you need me to play third base today and first base tomorrow, or I need to be the DH, cool. I'm still putting in all the work before I get onto the field, right? I can go and I'm hitting the weight room in the morning unsupervised, and I'm, eating the right way without somebody staring at me the whole way. It's the same thing for, a JO or, a team leader or something like that, who understands that like the performance on the field is almost has nothing to do with the physical and sort of mental capability. You can be the most talented human being in the world. If you're not doing the work off the field, now I sound like I'm talking to my 14-year-old. Like if you're not doing the work before, you've already put a ceiling on what you're capable of. So
yeah, I love that attitude. I want to transition a little bit and ask just about some of the complexities of navigating working with the DoD. As we all know, it's a complicated organization with its own language, with its own processes. It's a huge organization that I think can oftentimes be slow to turn. I feel like I see a lot of and hear a lot in defense-focused forums of people saying, well, we're trying to make these changes. We're trying to incentivize new companies to come into the space. And, we know it's not going fast. And for me, I look at it and I'm like, you guys are actually moving pretty fast. Yeah. That's how it seems to me. I want to ask you, so just would love to hear any thoughts that you have about how does one navigate the complexities of selling to and working with the DoD?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think, the DoD, and I mean, even like they'll take it up a level and just say like the U.S. government is often talked about as like a monolith, like this one single buying entity, one single customer. Like, we used to talk about like, hey, the DoD is it thinks it's an 800-pound gorilla, but in reality, it's 800 1-pound gorillas that all think they're 800-pound gorillas. Nice. And so you've got all these different buying centers. So there's like a ton of complexity there.
Yes.
But what I would say is, I didn't mean like you check me on this, but I've done a bunch of like commercial, highly regulated industry work, everything from like pharmaceuticals to finance to like aviation, hospitality, healthcare. Like you've got to go learn the intricacies of how in this industry do transactions occur? How is risk sort of, defined and carried and mitigated, and like how do executives make decisions? What are the buying levers? So there's a little bit of, I think, tradecraft that some of it's highly transferable. Some of it, like you've got to go understand the context of the operational environment that you're going into, right? Like I wouldn't drop back into Eastern Afghanistan. Before I went as a lieutenant, I read every book I could get my hands on the history of Afghanistan, on the cultures and the tribes, to understand all of it. Like you're kind of going to do that prep work. I think it is slow from a general standpoint, right? If I think about, the speed at which like B2B SaaS or like, direct to consumer kind of SaaS, like individual seat, like, hey, I built a new LM, like I built a new agent or some like inference capability and I can launch it online tomorrow and get feedback and go. But like you don't have some of that relative velocity in the government just because there's kind of safety, but you also don't have that. Like you couldn't go ship that to JP Morgan on the same day. Like it's just, you can ship it direct to consumer and like kind of open internet. But like, so I think that sometimes the DoD gets a bunch of shit for that, maybe unfairly. I think on the other side, I think it's super confusing because I go back to that 800-pound gorilla versus 801-pound gorillas. I think those 801-pound gorillas sometimes are saying things that are at odds with other 1-pound gorillas. And there's like a little bit of art and science and like the human kind of stitching it together where like you've got to shape a little bit, because you'll hear a lot of people who think they're only empowered to say no, that they're not empowered to say yes, that like they don't own the problem or it's not in their budget. But I think there's been a ton of progress, especially like the Hill. Like you now are seeing, post 9/11 kind of like GWAT vets that are sitting members of Congress that are on some of these like modernization caucuses or cyber, sitting on the cyber committees. You've got senior leaders in the department that kind of came up a little bit more digitally native and have a better appreciation. You're seeing new programs that are designed to ensure that as things come in and they're doing innovative like prototypes, they're not left to kind of die in the proverbial desert or valley. There are funds to get them across, but I mean, it requires the same amount of work as if you were like, I've built a piece of software and I'm going to go scale it so it's like the enterprise solution across Goldman, JP, and like Citi or Morgan or whatever. Like I think that's the part that sometimes gets lost, is that people are like, oh, it's just hard with the government. It's like, no, like sales is hard. Like good sales is really hard. It's like good salespeople are like the most sought after people.
Totally. And enterprise sales is especially tricky for some of the reasons that you're outlining. Some of the reasons that you're outlining right now, which is like, I've got to figure out who is my buyer. This person over here might think that they're my buyer, but they don't actually have the authority to make the decision. This person over here.
Dude, at enterprise, it's usually a different freaking office, right? Like, there's a procurement office over here. There's a finance office over here. There's a CTO over here. There's the actual champion is maybe at the executive level, but like when we're doing enterprise sales, like we're doing executive leadership team briefs all the way up. We've got the business case. So that's where I keep saying, like, to your point, there are parallels from selling commercial enterprise to selling government. There's just different words, right? There's a bunch of like gobbledygook lingo, and you need a little bit of like a decoder ring to understand what everybody's saying. But a lot of it's not super different.
Totally. And you're teeing up my next question perfectly, which is, it's like the listeners of this podcast are like, God, please stop asking this, but I'm not going to. So tune in somewhere else if you're sick of hearing it.
Yeah. Kick
Talk
rocks,
to me.
nerds.
Talk to me about the value of sales, because veterans
Yeah.
get out of the military and they think of sales and they think of a used car salesman, and
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like a 4-letter word, but you have
Yeah.
had a career in sales and now you are a chief executive officer. What do you think is the value of building the sales skill set in a career? Why should veterans consider building that skill set, and how has it benefited your career?
So I'm going to forget who told me this originally. I think it was one of my old bosses, Deb Westfall, but like she was great. She probably stole it from somebody too. So I'm going to steal it from her. At its core, an organization, any organization, does really two things. You create value or you protect value, right? So value creation, think, hey, I usually split that into like you build things, make things, or you sell things. Value protection is like, your finance, legal, stuff like that. So I think philosophically, you decide sort of what side of that ledger do you want to be on, create or protect. If you want to be on create, do you build things or do you sell things? Like there's a bunch of intricacy and like nuance down in there, but anything you're going to want to do aside from like hands-on keyboard building product, and I mean building product like down in as an engineer. If you want to be a product owner, if you want to be a CTO, if you want to be a CPO, if you want to be any of that, you have to understand the customer, the competitor, market forces, all of that. So from a sales standpoint, right, like we have this running joke. We just say everything is human because it's just like foundational tradecraft. Like you have to understand, you might not want like a number on your head. So you might sit in like partnerships and alliances or like build channels and sort of hand those off and all of that. But like, don't get it twisted. You're kind of contributing to one of two things. You're building it or you're selling it. And that is how an organization survives. So I think if you want to be in, earlier stage kind of high growth, you need to at a minimum understand exactly how that's done and have a high degree of empathy for it. If you want to lead those organizations, you look at any founder and they'll say, hey, the founding teams, there's usually a technical founder and a business founder. If you don't want to be the business founder, dude, that rocks. That's totally cool. Like, better learn how to code. So I think people sometimes get scared because, to your point, there's a used car. I think the other side, and I caution folks on this too, is be thoughtful around where you come in, right? Like over promising and being like, oh, I'm, sales guy Jimmy or sales gal Sally, and like I can do this, and coming in and putting like a big number on your back out of the gate. Like that's a wake up, right? So a lot of times I will look at vets and I will transition folks and I'll try to find them roles where, they're in partnerships or, they're a chief of staff, and get to understand like how the orgs work and get to kind of like almost like a right seat, left seat. Sometimes skill bridge is a great idea there, but like making sure that they have a chance to like learn the trade craft. Because there is like there are absolutely frameworks and handbooks and all of that on like, you don't have to go recreate a wheel for sales. Like a lot of prior art is there.
Yes.
But when you're coming out, man, I had no idea where to find it. Like I stumbled my way through in the beginning and I was like, oh shit, somebody wrote all this down. Why do you guys just give me this book?
I mean, wholeheartedly agree. I would even add, even for folks, there of course are roles where people are down and in, to your point, right? They're building a product, they're coding. But I would expand on what you said by saying that even for folks for whom that is true, they're still selling a lot. There's a lot of non-sales
100%.
selling. Like if you're
100%.
negotiating with your kid to go to bed, you're selling that.
Everything is sales.
If you're fundraising, you're selling. If you're hiring, it's a sales process, right? You're selling the opportunity to someone, and they are in turn selling their skill set to you. So I do think it's a really valuable skill set. Right.
I agree.
I want to ask, just on the topic, from someone that is always trying to get better at sales and just like recognize the value. What are some of your favorite resources? Like, you mentioned there's some frameworks, there's some books. Like, what are some of your favorite books on selling?
So there is a guy named Mo Bunnell. He runs a thing called the Bunnell Idea Group. And he uses the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, which is a quadrant, sort of like brain science on how people think, and then aligns. It's not the Shipley model, but like a traditional sort of like sales stage gate framework and associated tradecraft under that, designed to help people better elicit and understand and then contextualize their approach based on how their customer or champion thinks, how they hear things, and how they associate value. It is literally in its purest form the blend of art and science. I was fortunate to go to one of his like week-long seminar classes, I don't know, 10 years ago. And I mean, I'm still talking about it. So like it clearly changed my life. Like it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was the most useful sales training I'd ever done by an order of magnitude. And so he's got a podcast. They've got like mailer. You can get a bunch of it online. Like stuff like that is awesome. Things that will remove complexity. So show me structure. How do I move people on a path to, raving fan and all of that? How do I understand like how people think and why they think that way? And then how do I change my value prop? Right. Those are good. And then thinking about, there's like a winning without pitching back in the day was a killer one. Like Mo's got a book called Give to Grow. Some stuff like that. And then just understand the environment. Like go read like the high growth, the high growth startup, like understand like what is happening around you in an org and like what is normal and what like the types of like tension that you should feel. I think those are good, a mix of the two, because you want to understand how to do the thing and then you want to understand like the environment you're in or the ecosystem you're in. Those two together, I think, give you pretty good weapons for success.
That's awesome. I appreciate the plugs. I'm going to check some of these out. Sounds like some of them are pretty life-changing.
Dude, Mo's the man. Yeah. Cool.
I want to obviously be sensitive of your time, and I have a question. It's a philosophical question I want to make sure we get to. You're talking about your own journey out of the military and not sure what was next, and you were evaluating different industries. I see a lot of veterans. I feel like the number one thing I hear from veterans when they're getting out of the military, especially retiring officers who I think have a really difficult, or retiring senior enlisted folks who are at like 20 years, have like I think it's the most difficult transition, but they always tell me, oh, I want to get away from defense and do something completely different. And then I see a lot of folks 5 years down the road pivot back into defense. Yeah. Why is that the case? And can you just give me your perspective on
the same thing? Yeah. Yeah. There's this like boogeyman. Like if I get pigeonholed as like only a defense guy or gal, then like all I'm ever going to be able to do is this. And I think it is like I say boogeyman because it's this like fear of, okay, well, if I don't now like commercialize my resume or show that like, hey, there's transferability of my skill set, then all I'm ever going to be is, like Sergeant Major Snuffy or, Lieutenant Colonel Buffy or whatever. I think that's one. And I think two, there's this like super weird relationship between defense contractors and the military.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's somebody like Freud or somebody with a giant freaking brain can pull it apart on why. But there's like a codependency and a mutual hatred. It's like a really toxic relationship.
Yeah.
And people are like, I don't want to be like slimy defense contractor. And it's like, oh, guess you don't want a fucking Humvee then. Cool. Like, I swear, sorry. Like
You're good.
I think it's those two forces together. And look, like, I don't think this light bulb clicked for me until probably like my third year out of the military, and I had like worked for some cool interagency organizations, like had done a bunch of what I thought was like transformatively cool stuff. Like, again, while we thought we could still win a war. So I was like, yeah. And I'm like sitting in like slacks and a shirt in some building working on some program defense. And I was like, oh my God, I have so much more impact sitting right here than I did running around in uniform, doing cool guy stuff. And I was like, I can make such an outsized difference because I can just like move differently, I can have different conversations. Like I can see the playing field better. And I think folks see that and they're like, well, wait a second. Like I can do a bunch of stuff that matters and it's not slimy. And I'm not like, some grifter. I think they realize like the boogeyman's not real. And dude, in like the last 10 years, I've tried to tell everybody that. And I think it's something you got to just live. Like if you've got it in your head that there's a boogeyman, like you're going to have to just go like look under the bed and go into the dark closet and not get eaten by it. And then come back out and be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are definitely some of the reasons that people want to pivot away from the defense. Specifically, the second point that you listed around like, feeling like there's some kind of defense contractor who's like, it's like, yo, you hung up the uniform, like keep it moving. But like, I don't know. I talked to a lot of transitioning, especially retiring officers for whom like, getting out as a junior officer, you have plenty of time to reinvent yourself. If you get out as a 4-star, you're getting paid for your Rolodex. But in between, it's like, oh man, there's this like no man's land or something like that at the 05, 06 level where if you don't go into defense, you're not getting credit for the equity that you built in your career and the expertise. And it's just difficult to know where to plug folks in. So I always encourage people to take a look at it. And
there's like the rise of dual use, and I don't really love that term because I think John Wick and Keanu Reeves have shown us that like a pencil is dual use if oriented correctly. But there's an opportunity to like sit in a more pure play commercial organization, but to leverage, to your point, Brendan, to leverage that equity, and use that in a way to kind of thread. And you're seeing. Man, I've got a bunch of friends who transitioned like right off the NSC into really interesting. Hey, they're chief of staff for this org. Hey, they're, a senior sort of go-to-market leader. And they're learning maybe a little bit of like lingo or atmospherics on the commercial side, but they're able to be like a really good guiding hand on the public sector side. And like, that rocks. Like that's such an awesome role to transition. Now that's not going to be that for everybody, but like stuff like that exists and is sought after. I think it's used that transitioning sort of like 506, E89. Like you've got to understand that like, a lot about some and a little about some, and that's okay. You don't have to. The military sometimes creates inadvertently this pressure for that leader to be somewhat like omnipotent and the all-knowing, commander, sergeant major. And like, dude, you know how valuable it is to be like, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Like, let me get you an answer. It's the same thing they beat you up on as a staff officer.
Totally.
Right? What's the worst thing you can do is like an assistant 3. It'd be like some bullshit answer to a commander, and then you're just going to get smoked. It's the same thing as like an associate in banking or a salesperson or a manager somewhere. Like you can build in a little bit of that like emotional IQ, that EQ or whatever. I think you can go a long way.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I love when I hear people say like, oh, I'm actually not sure what the answer to that question is, or like, because it's like, I mean, it's just a sign of humility. I want to make sure that we bring things home here, and I want to ask you for any advice that you would have for transitioning vets. It's a fairly open-ended question. Would love for you to take it in whatever direction that you would like.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like dovetailing off what we just talked about, like the only dumb question in the transition is the one you don't ask. I know we talked offline about, things like the Honor Foundation and Commit and just these 10x organizations that are so good. I think the best piece of advice that I would give to anybody listening who's like turning the corner on transition is you are not the first one to do this. So don't go prosecute it as if you're the first one to do it. Right? Like I probably talk to 100 people a year, and I mean everything from like cold LinkedIn messages to so-and-so gave me your cell phone. Can you jump on the horn? And dude, I will take every one of those I can squeeze in. I take them on the weekends. Like all of us want the next generation to have it easier than we did coming out. And what I tell every single person is your job is now to turn around and grip hands with whoever's coming next and get them over, because it's freaking scary. You're uncertain. You go from a high fidelity, high certainty organization to one that like sort of doesn't make sense. You might have a family, kids, mortgage. Like, there is a whole community that wants to help make you successful. So, the tribe still exists, so to speak. That's my biggest one, right? Go ask every question you could think of. Go harass people. Like, be respectful about it, right? Like, don't get carried away. But you know my point. Like, go ask. Someone has experienced whatever thing you're going through and can help you shave a bunch of bumps off the road.
For sure. Yeah. Transitioning vets, if you were terrible at one thing, it's like asking for help. Yeah. And it's because they feel like they don't have anything to offer in return, but you will offer things in return, and it doesn't have to be transactional. You'll help the next generation, to Tyler's point, which is more than enough because someone did it for us. So
that's exactly right.
That's really good advice. Thank you. Tyler, I want to ask, where can people find out more, support your work?
I mean, shameless plug for a couple different things. I'm a partner to a thing called the Silicon Valley Defense Group. It's a 501c3 nonprofit that exists to create a venue for conversation in between regulators and investors and government leaders and private companies to try to take sort of what we were talking about, Brendan, and create more vibrancy in the market and more shared understanding. So check that out. There's always opportunities to get involved. Secondfront.com. We're hiring a bunch. We got a team of a mix of vets and non-vets and sort of every Intel community veterans. You see folks on there, reach out to them if you've got transition advice. We've all been through it. You find me on LinkedIn. If I can be useful in any capacity, do not hesitate to reach out.
And we got to plug your podcast. You got a podcast too.
Heck yeah, dude, the podcast rocks. So All Quiet on the Second Front. I laugh because I don't think we thought it was going to be, we didn't really know what it was going to become. And it's become, I think, a really fun way. The goal there, if you're thinking about defense tech or, raising money or any of that, the goal is to take all of these conversations that might happen on the margins of cocktail parties or receptions, which might be something you can't see or you're not part of. Take all those conversations, condense them down to like bite-sized 20 to 30-minute snippets and just index them. So if you're, hey, I want to hear a perspective from an investor. Hey, I want to hear a government leader talking about tech. Hey, I want to hear a corporate startup leader. We've got all of that in there. And it's meant to bring a little bit of levity and like less buzzwords to it. So
that's awesome.
Check in. Yeah.
Well, there's always a bit
I forgot about that.
There's always a bit of levity whenever I talk to you. Tyler, I really appreciate you joining us today. Thanks so much, man.
Dude, I am so excited to be here. Like I said, I am a big old fanboy of everything you guys are doing. So thanks for having me and the opportunity, brother.
Feeling is mutual. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you like today's conversation, you will love our in-person events. We've got happy hours coming up in Philly, DC, New York, San Francisco, Utah. We're going to do some ski stuff this season, I promise. Check them out at themilvet.org/events. Sign up for the newsletter. We've got a bunch of open roles at fantastic companies, and we hope to see you at one of the live events. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you guys back here next week.